Welcome to Kids Zone. This is a boy's guide to geography and arithmetic with Captain Colin. Lesson 1, Longitude Cake. Would it surprise you to hear that arithmetic, mathematics and anything to do with numbers are some of the least popular subjects in school? Of course not. Numbers, though, are essential. It is true that using numbers can sometimes be frustrating, but they are vital to everything. For example, mathematics is indispensable to computing. Every day you do countless things with numbers without even thinking about it. So even if you don't have a grasp for mathematics, if you want to work in aviation, you'll have to study hard. When your parents take you somewhere in the car, you estimate how long it will take. When you buy something, you try to work out if you can afford it. So every day we are making calculations without a textbook or a calculator. So let's begin our journey. Let's look at a map of the world. Now from London, which of these cities is the most distant? Seoul or Singapore? What do you think? Keep the answer to yourself. It doesn't matter if it's wrong, and we'll come back to it at the end. Now before we proceed, let us consider something for a moment. The map is flat, yet the world is round. This distorts our perception of distance and location. To help us understand our planet, we have created a system of invisible lines called latitude and longitude. Each of those lines has been given a number. It may sound silly to have invisible lines with numbers, but those numbers make it simpler to understand. So to help us understand those lines, we'll begin with a cake. Yes, a cake. A dome-shaped cake that looks much like half of the world. If we slice the cake in half, we have represented the prime meridian, which runs from the North Pole to the South Pole. It runs through Greenwich to the east of London, hence the expression Greenwich Mean Time. Now this prime meridian denotes zero longitude. To the west of the line you have degrees west, and to the east degrees east. So let's continue slicing our cake until we have many slices of longitude. Just as the slices of cake can represent longitude, the edge of the cake can also be the equator, called this because it is equidistant from both the north and south poles. So where the prime meridian and the equator intersect, we have the Earth divided into four parts. To the left of the prime meridian is the western hemisphere, and to the right is the eastern hemisphere. These parts are then divided again to form northeast and northwest. This tells us they are both north of the equator and east and west respectively of the prime meridian, and the same logic applies to southeast and southwest. Generally, when we speak about the western and eastern hemisphere, we talk about cultural difference. When we talk about the northern and southern hemisphere, we also talk about cultural difference, but also environmental, because the seasons are reversed. Once the world is divided into four quarters, it's easy to understand and much simpler to specify where locations are, though you have to always remember that the distortion of the flat surface. Just as the slices of the cake get wider at the edge of the cake, the lines of longitude are at their widest at the equator, and they begin to narrow as they all meet at the poles, which is the equivalent of the centre of the cake. So the straight lines on the page of an atlas or a map are not entirely accurate, but they are an excellent guide. Now coordinates are listed by giving latitude and longitude in degrees, and then minutes and seconds to give a very close approximation of distance. But in this exercise we'll concentrate solely on degrees, leaving out minutes and seconds. Although that is not entirely accurate, it does help us get to grips with the fundamental geographical concepts. So let's look at some cities we've heard of. Let's start with Sydney. Sydney is in the southeast hemisphere, so it's 33 degrees south of the equator and 151 east of the prime meridian. For northeast, let's use Tokyo. Tokyo is 35 degrees north and 139 east. For southwest, let's look at Rio de Janeiro. It's quite near the prime meridian, so while Sydney was 151 degrees and Tokyo was 139 degrees east, Rio de Janeiro's number of degrees of west is much lower, at 43. Finally, for the northwest, we look at New York. It is more westerly again than Rio de Janeiro, so its degrees west is 73, but it's 40 north of the equator. So of the cities, it's the most distant from the equator. You can look at an atlas and find places you have visited, or maybe cities where you have relatives. Try to plot their coordinates. One thing you'll notice that when you use maps is that many use lines of latitude and longitude every 5 degrees, some 10 degrees, some 15 or even 20. So you have to bear in mind the ratio on the map. Look at the scale to give you an idea. Thank you very much, and join us for our next lesson. I am a